In today's video, we have a ton of news to cover, including some trade talk updates around guys like Jack Eichel and Jonas Korpisalo from Columbus. We also have news on the NHL waiver wire. We have a huge signing with Adam Fox and the New York Rangers. We have a suspension, some injury updates, and a big update from Gary Bettman after a press conference from the NHL's position with everything gone down with the Hawks scandal. All that and more coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of news to talk about here today, all kinds of tidbits of information. Let's kick things off, though, with the Gary Bettman, Bill Daly press conference representing the NHL, discussing the whole scandal with the Chicago Blackhawks. They answered several questions from the media in regards to the league's position on different things around Kevin Cheveldayoff, the Blackhawks, and just a variety of things. And to be completely honest, I didn't get to see the press conference in its entirety live, but I did get to see a big chunk of the replay, went through a lot of the questions. And to me, this, from the league's perspective, just from Bettman and Daly's perspective, I personally thought it was really a disaster. I thought this was probably the worst press conference I've ever seen from Bettman and Daly. The way the questions were answered were absolutely terrible. Some bad takes in there. You can tell Gary Bettman is a lawyer by trade. Certainly how he's trained, which, you know, we all know that. For example, one of the questions was about the $2 million fine to the Blackhawks for this situation. Bettman reiterated he thought that was a more than fair fine, called it substantial. But reminder, they fined the Devils $3 million quite a long time ago for cap circumvention when the Caufield contract was first signed. That was, like 10, 11 years ago. So, of course, the value of money changes over time. All that time ago, $3 million. So they just basically, by saying that this fine was fair, substantial, and, appropriate, they basically say that cap circumvention is a worse crime than covering up sexual abuse. And I'm sorry, but that's just flat out wrong. So that is a terrible take, in my opinion, from Bettman. Gary Bettman was also asked that would the league consider providing support when it comes to the second victim from the Michigan team, of course, who was unfortunately also a victim of Brad Aldrich's. Considering everything that went on in Chicago, the fact that it was covered up allowed him to continue employment in the same field. A variety of other places leads him to Michigan, where he reoffends again. And of course, there was other stuff in between, but still, that's where that situation happened. And maybe if the situation of the NHL and the Blackhawks would have been handled properly, there's a possibility, and I think a good one at that situation in Michigan never happens. And so he was asked, would they provide any support to that person, and he said that he would have to know more about the situation. He didn't say it was a complete no. He went on to say that basically, it's possible, and without even knowing more about the situation, that he would like to think that they would make resources available and all that. So the answer wasn't entirely bad, but to say that you need to know more about the situation, I mean, Aldrich was charged like 7 years ago. So, I don't understand, what more do you need to know, Gary Bettman? There's tons of information about the situation that you could have been well aware of. The other big problem here with this conference today is that there was several media members in attendance looking to participate and ask questions. Of course, Rick Westhead of TSN was the main investigative reporter who has kind of speared along this whole campaign to get more awareness to this story and really push things here. Westhead was on the call trying to get a question, and they were trying their best to dodge him. They really were almost made it look like they weren't going to go to him. TSN insider and reporter Pierre LeBrun, one of Westhead's colleagues, got to ask a question and a follow-up before Westhead did, which he didn't even think was fair and appropriate. And he even said, after answering his question, that he really hopes that his colleague, Rick Westhead, would get a question. So, he had to speak up, and I'm, proud of LeBrun for doing that, to kind of call them on it out in the open. Westhead finally did get his questions in, thankfully, but still, it's just not a good look to me here. But obviously he asked, LeBrun's question was about reaching out to Sheldon Kennedy, of course, who is a abuse survivor himself. That was a major scandal a number of years ago. Of course, it wasn't NHL situation, but still, he went on to become an NHL player. He's done a lot of work in the last number of years, when it comes to raising awareness and trying to help get this out of the game and create situations out, Sheldon Kennedy has done a lot since he was a victim himself. And he asked, would they consider reaching out to Sheldon Kennedy? And Bettman kind of went on to say, again, like part of his answer was okay, that, they would certainly be open to it. But one thing he made perfectly clear and had to say, well, Sheldon Kennedy's experience wasn't an NHL situation. Like, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, so what? The fact is, it's one of the most well-known hockey scandals of all time when it comes to, especially anything to do with abuse. And he's done all kinds of work to try to create awareness and try, and make things more public or on the situation since this all went down. So, like, what better person could you think to maybe partner with to help your league make sure that something like this doesn't happen again? So the first part of the answer almost seemed dismissive. He went on to say that, that they would probably be open to it, but like, I just didn't really care for that answer either. There's a big meeting going on with the NHLPA. I know as I've recorded this video, the meeting I believe was still ongoing. It was a couple hours in with all 32 team reps having the potential to be on that call. I don't know exactly who's on the call because that hasn't been made public yet, at least as I record this, but still, like, it's a situation where Donald Fair in the NHLPA certainly don't have a good look for letting the player down either and not having us back, and that there's going to be more consequences there, I am sure. There's a lot of players that are very upset over how this was handled. I'm probably sure a lot of them are probably thinking, what if this had been me? I mean, this is a player who was a high first-round pick, came into the league with a ton of potential, and I do think it's fair to say that it had a major impact on the fact that he never got to play NHL games. The other thing that, to me, also was kind of mind-boggling as well is Kyle Beach was in the Blackhawks organization for 3 more years after that situation was, took place. So that must have been incredibly difficult for him to continue to push for his NHL dreams. And I can't help but wonder, after making it known and, putting the complaint in that this happened, did that suppress him and his opportunity? I really hope it didn't. But, with the fact that he was in the organization for another 3 years after that must have been incredibly difficult for him to be able to look at these executives in the management team in Chicago and not really seeing anything being done about what happened to him. So there's that. The other big thing too was Kevin Cheveldayoff. Of course, he was supposed to have a press conference today along with the Jets owner Mark Chipman. That was delayed, and now it's supposed to happen tomorrow due to illness with the owner. Apparently he was having a case of vertigo, like extreme vertigo, and couldn't do media, so they're hoping he'll feel better enough to do that tomorrow. When it comes to Cheveldayoff, though, Bettman did answer the fact that essentially he said that Kevin Cheveldayoff was a very minor role in all this, and of all the executives that were a part of that were interviewed by the investigators, Kevin Cheveldayoff is the only one himself who indicated that he was even present in the room during the meeting. That I guess he was small enough in the pecking order that the other executives that ranked above him didn't even mention to investigators that he was even present when they were asked who took part in the meeting. So I guess the Bettman's kind of giving him credit for outing himself for being in it, because if nobody else said he was there, if he chose to say that himself, they probably would have been nothing at all. It would have been resolved even sooner, I would think. I don't know. But he did admit he was there. So he, I guess he's good on him for being honest, but still, the fact he was there and again didn't speak up, didn't do anything, is still troubling to me. And the fact that Bettman went on to reiterate that they have processes in place and that reminders to teams, and they're trying to build this up here, that teams know that it's not okay to know something and to not speak up, and they want to keep pushing that, but yet then somebody who did know and didn't speak up faces 0 consequences and 0 punishment from the league while everybody else lost their job. I don't think that's fair. The least guilty, they're all guilty, but he's probably the least guilty, because I guess he went with the approach, and Bettman seems to be okay with it, that he was under the impression, based on the meeting, that the senior executive in the room, the most senior, who was John McDonough, was handling the situation. And of course, a few weeks later, as the season wraps up and they start moving on with the offseason, that Brad Aldrich was not with the organization anymore. So he assumed that was a part of it and that it was handled and that they moved on. Like, there should be something for the fact that, like I said, you're complicit. If you know of a crime and you don't report the crime, you still are guilty. That's just the way things work. But still, I thought he'd be facing a suspension or a big fine, something, not nothing. When it comes to Joel Quenneville being able to coach the night before his meeting with Bettman, he was asked about that, and he said essentially he didn't want Joel to assume he was being prejudged. Then at that point, he would have known before the meeting even started that they looked at him as being guilty and wanted him out. Also, the Florida Panthers that let him coach, and to me, that's a bad choice on their part. You let somebody coach like that when they're under a pretty serious investigation, which ultimately resulted in them being losing their job and being unemployed with your organization. So not a good choice. So anyways, that's a story. It just agitates me. So at the end of the day, we learned a lot that the league really doesn't care. At the end of the day, and it was just, in my opinion, it was a terrible, terrible look here for Bettman and a lot of these answers. Like I said, sometimes when it comes to some of the things we've heard about the scandal, they almost makes you think that why do they even open their mouth? Because they make themselves look that much worse when they do. But as we've heard referenced here by Taylor Hall, who spoke out as a player, saying that it's kind of like an old boys club. Yeah, you know what? It's a bunch of rich old men that run the league, run the teams, and that are there for profits. And at the end of the day, they certainly come across like they don't really care about the players. And that needs to change. And I know we're hearing a lot of people say a lot of the right things now, but it's too little too late, and it's going to be hard to buy into it until you see real progress. Seeing is believing in my book. And that's going to take some time to convince me otherwise, that they've really taken a different approach and have a different mindset about looking after their players. But now it's really going to focus on the union and Donald Fehr and how all that plays out. There's certainly going to be, like I said, more consequences, and we have not still heard the end of this yet. It's going to continue on for some time. It will dominate the headlines in the hockey world for, hard to say, for the foreseeable future. Now, on to some other news today. We do have a lot of other tidbits of news that I think are important to talk about in the NHL today. We have some waiver news. The Ottawa Senators have placed forward Scott Sabourin, who's basically been the 13th forward, somewhat of an enforcer, doesn't play much. I know there seems to be a divide from Sens fans on whether or not he even deserved to be a roster spot, but they kept him around after training camp instead of trying to put him through waivers to send him to the American Hockey League. Mainly, I think, due to Austin Watson being injured. Scott Sabourin, I think, was mainly signed in the offseason as just a veteran guy who could be a leader and had a degree of toughness to their American League team. I don't think he was ever signed with the intention of being a regular NHL player, but they ran into a ton of injuries early on between the end of camp and the first few games of the year, and it created a little bit more of a necessity for him to play. But when he's played, he's had a very limited role. And, it's time. They need to open up some roster spots. Watson's ready to come back. Matt Murray was ready to come back. So Sabourin has to go on waivers to create a roster spot. And I'm assuming he'll be cleared, which is pretty likely. You never know, but I don't think a team will grab him. Then he'll go down to the minors and get to play the role that he was expected to. And I'm not certain at all that we'll see him again in the NHL this season. You never know, but to me, it's probably doubtful. Now, we also have a suspension today. We have Cedric Paquette of the Montreal Canadiens has been suspended for 2 games for a illegal dirty hit on Trevor Zegras of the Anaheim Ducks, which, of course, just recently happened on the Montreal Canadiens West Coast swing. Was not a very productive swing for Montreal. For the most part, they've been still losing a lot of games. They're one of the bottom teams in the league. Things are not going well at all. And Paquette, to me, doesn't really look to be a great free agent signing at this point. Kind of looks out of place. Hasn't really contributed a whole lot. And it was a very dangerous hit on Zegras. So the suspension, in my opinion, well-deserved. And he'll serve his 2 games. Although I must say, there was a very, very similar hit of Alex Ovechkin on Nick Paul in the Cap Senators game just within the last week. It looked almost identical. Ovechkin got nothing at all. Not even a penalty. No suspension. Not a fine. Nothing. He almost creates the exact same hit to me. If you look at the replays and watch them side by side, they are not, 100% identical, but close enough that you would think that the punishment would be similar enough, but no. So to me, no big surprise. We do seem to see a lot of, irregularities, we could call them, from the league and some of these calls throughout the year. On to some other news. Travis Hamonic is officially back in Vancouver. Of course, he already had rejoined the organization and spent a little bit of time in the American Hockey League, basically working on conditioning after missing all of training camp in the first part of the season with a personal matters, what they called it. It does appear to be what they're saying. I mean, they're not going to come out and say a whole lot, but it does appear like a lot of the missed time, the main reason was due to vaccination status. At this point, they said that he will be considered fully vaccinated soon. So that makes it sound like he's had his first dose and will be eligible for his second shortly. I'm not sure when he had his first, but it sounds like it's been long enough that he's getting close to being able to get that second one and be able to have fully vaccinated status. So that's likely was related to why he was out, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter too much. At least they get their defenseman back in their lineup. He was a good partner for Quinn Hughes last year, and that should help stabilize that defense core in Vancouver, and hopefully he can play a decent role like he did last year. Some other news, we have what we all thought would be one of the top candidates, if not the top candidate, for the Calder Trophy and top rookie. We used to call him Goal Caufield, but now we just call him Cole again because he's goalless this year. Caufield has struggled mightily out of the gate, but then again, so has the entire team. I don't think we can put his slow start completely just on himself. Obviously, as an individual, he has to own that, but as a team as well, they just are not having a good start. I don't have to tell you that if you're a Montreal fan or hockey fan in general. I'm sure you're well aware that the Hams are off to a terrible start, but the team is really, really different than they were compared to the team in the playoff run. It's just that simple. There's a lot of changes, and some were pretty drastic here. You know, you lost Danault and Tatar off your top line. If you look back at the analytics of the last couple of years, Danault, Tatar, and Gallagher were actually way more productive than anybody ever usually give them credit for. You lost a major leadership gap there with Shea Weber and Carey Price. Not to mention some other smaller, less significant changes. They were been without some other members of the D-Corps too. Like Romanov has struggled too. Would not be completely shocked if the Habs decide to give Romanov a conditioning stint too, down in the minors for a little while. But they might be a little bit more afraid that he'll be wanting to be upset over that, because I know there's a lot of Russian players that don't like to play in the American Hockey League. So I don't know if that's an issue for him or not, but it probably wouldn't hurt him. He looks like he could use a situation where he can go play down a level, play a higher role, and get his confidence back like Caufield. I'm sure they will be fine longer term. I know all kinds of social media reactions to this. But at the end of the day, we saw what Cole Caufield could do in the playoffs last year. That was not a fluke. And I think he'll be able to be bouncing back and be fine. He just needs to go down, get some reps, get his confidence back, and I'm sure he'll reappear in Montreal as soon as we see that. Vegas Golden Knights continue to be hit by the injury bug, and this certainly could propel the more likelihood of seeing a trade, which we'll talk about here momentarily. But William Karlsson, another center iceman for them, is going to be out for about 6 weeks or a little better with a broken foot. So this team's already without Stone and Pacioretty and others. Adding William Karlsson to this list does not help matters at all. They're certainly the walking wounded. They're already without Alex Tuch to start the season as well. So this is a real major issue for Vegas. Like I said before, thankfully, in their case, they're in a weaker division in the Pacific. If they can get people back and healthy here in the next couple of weeks, and if they can go on a run, they should be just fine. But still, it's not going to be easy. And they've been doing, decent considering all the bodies, in my opinion, that they've been missing here. But another major blow there to the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, of course, we also had a huge extension just announced a short time ago before I started to record this video. The Adam Fox extension with the Rangers is done. 7-year deal, $9.5 million average annual value, and he is worth every penny, in my opinion, compared to the other guys making that same sort of money. We're looking at Seth Jones. We're looking at Dougie Hamilton. To me, this guy is way more worth it. He's younger and more dynamic. This is the largest contract for a defenseman coming out of an entry-level deal. These other guys are obviously a little bit older. It's not their second contract. They're further along in their careers. So this is a record-setting deal for a guy coming out of that ELC. So Adam Fox is an absolute stud for the New York Rangers. I'm sure the teams before the Rangers that held his rights but were not able to get him signed are probably not happy seeing just how good he turned out to be. And I think they all knew he was going to be good, which is why they wanted to get him signed. Like, he was drafted by the Flames. He ended up getting acquired by the Hurricanes once it was known that he was not going to sign with Calgary when he was in college. And then Carolina wasn't able to convince him to sign there. And he essentially wanted to sign with the Rangers. So they said, well, we might as well trade him to the Rangers and get something in return rather than have his rights run out and then him sign with the Rangers as a free agent anyway. And now here we are. So, I mean, the Rangers got him for a steal, and that's an absolutely contract that's definitely worth it. And, of course, like other teams, though, they've got a contract for Fox done. They get Zibanejad extended. They've got some big-time money here, within their core group of players that are now signed long-term. So they've got a lot of players there. I think 17 players under contract for next year. They have around $10 million in cap space. They're going to need to have contracts for Lafreniere and Kakko and some other younger players done here soon as well. So I think they're okay cap-wise for right now, but it's possible as early as the coming off season that they are going to have to possibly look at, who doesn't fit longer term and moving out at least one decent contract, because when you have obviously that many players making that much money, it becomes challenging to round out the rest of your roster, and they have some key younger players here that they're going to want to keep, and they're going to have the money available to do that with. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle it. But this Fox extension, compared to the other guys making $9+ million on the blue line, is well worth it. I wondered if it might hit $10 million, to be honest, and it didn't. So to me, the Rangers got themselves a pretty good deal. Now on to the trade rumor updates for today. Nothing too substantial on the Jack Eichel front. A lot of talk too about Vegas, Calgary, and Anaheim. Of course, we've reported a couple times recently that NHL insiders were indicating that a deal with Vegas was getting extremely close. Elliot Friedman talked about today the fact that it was looking like he was hearing it could actually go down and happen on Friday. It didn't end up doing that. It sounds like what's holding it up is the fact that the Sabres won't retain any salary on the Eichel contract, and that the acquiring teams like Vegas and Calgary are trying to figure out how to make it work from a cap perspective. I think from the Vegas perspective, I think it sounds like they kind of have an agreement somewhat in place on the main pieces going to Buffalo. They just have to figure out the cap gymnastics here and see if they can maybe even either get a third team to come in or convince Buffalo to take a certain contract back. The Sabres had made it known before, according to reports at least, that they would take at least one NHL contract back of decent value to offset the money, but I'm not sure exactly what is in that deal. Nobody wants to really go out on a limb here and mention names. I know Friedman's mentioned that at this stage, when trades are that late in the mix, when you start throwing names out there, sometimes teams get a little bit paranoid and they don't want the sources that they talk to within regards to those teams don't really want too much info relayed out in case there's a change of opinion or something out there. But essentially, it sounds like they kind of have that deal worked out. It's just the cap part. So as Vegas continues to work with other teams or whatnot, we could see this happen sooner than later. But the Flames and the Ducks apparently sound like they're still in the mix. When it comes to Anaheim, though, to me, the Ducks could swoop in here and maybe come out with a better trade value. They view Eichel as being the ideal, perfect replacement for Ryan Getzlaf longer term. They have a ton of prospects, even if they don't want to include Zegras and Drysdale. I know for a fact that based on what we've heard, I'd be shocked if they were willing to include both. At this point, I might even be surprised if they were willing to include one. And it sounds like Hampus Lindholm or Golly Jacob Silverberg, one or both, could be potentially something that Anaheim's trying to put in a package to Buffalo, or one of those two going to another team to create the cap space. And then, of course, like I said, you've got other prospects that look really good too. Like you've got Mason McTavish, you've got Jacob Perreault, you got Benoit Olivier Groulx. You still got young guys like Steele and Terry and Comtois. Comtois seems to be falling out of favor there. Like there's a big group of younger related players that are all 22, 23 and under. And then, of course, you get some draft currency in there as well, because there's bound to be one or two high picks involved, so they can place conditions on them. You can't place a condition on a player, right? So you're bound to have some of that. So we'll see. This saga drags on and continues, but ultimately, like I said, it's kind of the cap gymnastics that's slowed down the talk. So even though on the weekend it was looking like we were really, really close, it's kind of, I wouldn't say cooled, but slowed down. Some hiccups have been hit here and we'll see where it goes. When it comes to Jonas Korpisalo, Columbus Blue Jackets writer Aaron Portzline is reporting that trade talks have heated up on this goaltender, and he actually could end up getting traded sooner than later. If you look at the fact that he's a pending unrestricted free agent, there's pretty much a guarantee here that he's not going back to Columbus, given the contract to Elvis Merzlikins. If you look at the fact that even if they wanted to sign him as a backup and offer him a contract for less money, I don't see him taking that offer. He's probably going to end up testing American, trying to find either a starting role for himself or more of a platoon situation. Either way, he's going to get more money on the open market. But according to Portzline, the main teams that have inquired, and it's not the team we've heard most before, was the Oilers. But now he's saying that the most recent teams who inquire on his services are the Coyotes, the Sabres, and the Montreal Canadiens, which is a tad surprising. Of course, the Columbus Blue Jackets could talk to Arizona or Buffalo. That makes a lot of sense on either front. Their longer-term goaltending situation has a little bit more question marks than most teams around the league. The Sabres have been getting good performance out of Craig Anderson, but clearly that's a short-term situation. They do have Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen in the system, who very well could be an NHL goalie in the near future, but to have a guy like Korpisalo for him to partner with and be a good tandem could be a good idea. The Coyotes clearly don't have a clear-cut future goaltender, so he could be a guy there and a player that really intrigues them. And when it comes to Montreal, they may not see him as being a huge long-term piece, but at the same time, maybe they're thinking that Carey Price is going to be out longer than they originally thought. So, of course, it's hard to predict that player assistance program. They know it's going to be a minimum of 30 days, which, at this point, it's probably going to be longer than that because we're not far off from that now. Really, we're over halfway through that. So maybe they want some insurance to be able to get the guys like Montembeault. He could go back on waivers. Maybe Jake Allen could use probably a little bit more of a rest. I think Jake's playing pretty well, but the team in front of him hasn't really come through. So hard to say exactly where this goes, but it makes sense that a Price is going to be out longer, that maybe they find more of a veteran guy to help Jake instead of having the younger guys like Montembeault or Primo. And if it's going to be, a very disappointing season, perhaps if this continues, you probably don't want a guy like Primo really being in the mix. You can let him play in Laval, be in a more positive situation, and hopefully they can have more success at that level than the Habs are having at the NHL level. And, he could be more into the future here before he gets his regular NHL opportunity. But Korpisalo certainly getting a ton of interest from teams that need goaltending around the league. So let me know your thoughts on everything discussed here today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.